Welcome to my devlog series, where I document the challenges I undertake each month using Unreal Engine's free for the month assets. Anyway, let's get into it. The rules of the challenge are, as always, I must use at least one of Epic's free for the month assets. I shouldn't spend more than 1 week of effort on the project for the whole month, and I must make a video reviewing the assets and what was learned. A bonus objective for me this month is to also submit my game to the WoWE Jam 4.0 and the LTGD Game Jam, so I'll be waiting to start until the themes are announced. As usual, let's start with a look at what we've got this month. Big Office. Well, this looks like just about the most expensive office in the world. Maybe we could do the Stanley Parable Silicon Valley edition? Probably not. Open World RPG Toolkit. Just like last month, we're getting a genre-based toolkit, so that always seems like a good target. But an open world game in 60 hours? Maybe we can just make use of its subsystems without actually making a 90% empty open world. Storage house set. Alright, there's a lot of props here. That's pretty cool. Maybe we can attach this to the office as a loading dock or something? That might get pretty heavy though. By default, itch.io has a 1 gigabyte limit, and I wouldn't really want people to have to download more than that anyway. Moving on, we have MySQL integration. Okay, this is a cool thing to have, and thanks Epic, this might come in handy someday. I'm not making a game that requires the installation of a MySQL database, or me hosting the connection to that database. If any of you out there are planning to use this, please make sure you understand the security risks first. Cartoon water shader. This looks really nice. These kinds of cartoony assets are pretty popular in the indie space, so it's really good to have things like this in your toolbox. Compared to these other, more realistic assets, it should be a lot easier to fit this into a wide variety of projects. So what? We're shipping items between the warehouse and the office in an open sea adventure? It's probably best to not try and mix everything together. And for the permanently free collection, we have Stylized Egypt. Well, it calls itself stylized. I guess it isn't hyper-realistic, but it's still pretty well detailed. I don't know if that water asset would really fit in with this. I think they're kind of different levels of stylized. I suppose we could create a game about going up and down the Nile? There is a permanently free African animals pack on the marketplace actually, but they are on the realistic side, so it would definitely look like a game made of a bunch of random assets. So what I'm thinking right now is to take two of these, Open World RPG Toolkit and Storage House Set, and make something where we have to navigate the warehouse to find stuff. I don't want to get too ambitious, but maybe I can address different parts of the warehouse and make use of the Open World RPG Toolkit to help you find where things are. Not to mention, we'll also have to see how this even fits in with the theme of the game jams. Alright, see you on the other side. So the theme for the WoWE Jam was Collaborate with AI, which kind of threw me for a loop, while the theme for the LTGD Jam was to make the title of your game fit the initials LTGD. So that was much easier to do. I did some investigation before the themes were announced and decided that the Open World RPG Toolkit asset would have to be modified if I wanted to use it for anything, really. I'll get more into that later, but it wasn't an unreasonable amount of modification. I didn't want to try to make additional assets due to the 3-day time limit for the game jam, so I decided to go with the warehouse and have a game where you need to fight against an AI who would be better at shipping packages than you are. I'm not quite sure how I came up with the idea of an evil multi-billion-dollar shipping company that abuses its warehouse workers, but I decided to name this imaginary company Anazom. No relation to any real-life events, I can assure you. Anyway, let's do a quick review of the assets I used. First off, Storage House Set. Actually, Quixel Megascans has their own set of warehouse assets. Now, I don't think their collection is as extensive as this pack, and I think most of their assets are on the dirty and abandoned side, whereas this pack has a clean look that you can dirty up if you want. I'm not sure if I can 100% recommend you buy this asset pack if you're watching this from the future. While it is high quality, 2K textures for almost every asset, multiple materials and versions of almost every asset, and absolutely modular. If you need a complete indoor warehouse setting, everything in it, and you don't need absolute max quality, 4K everything, millions of polygons, and if you're making a game, you probably don't, then this pack is for you. However, I didn't see anything in the pack that would help you to add a convincing exterior to the warehouse if you needed that as well. There are doors, and it's possible you could use the interior walls as exterior walls, but I really don't think you're going to achieve a convincing look. but it absolutely has everything you need to make a consistent interior. Onto the mechanical core of the game, Open World RPG Toolkit. If you've seen my last video, this is in no way as refined as the point-and-click adventure toolkit that we got last month. I'll just run quickly through the bad things, as, while there are quite a few annoyances, the asset is well made enough that you can adapt it for your purposes rather quickly. Side note real quick, this actually relates to one of the reasons I started this series. Yes, there are developers out there making cheap asset flips, and there are developers out there who think they can just buy assets and their dream game will just appear before them. Both of these groups are failing to understand what assets are for. If you actually want to make a good game, you need to put in the work, period. Buying assets to accelerate your development is not a bad thing, but you need to be prepared to pull out the pieces of that asset, break it down, and build it back up into something that actually fits your vision of the game. Understanding someone else's asset, integrating it into your game, modifying it, debugging it, all of that is a skill. If you are making indie games and you want to work at a larger company, learning how to approach and adapt other people's work is a very valuable skill. If you just want to make your own games and you don't care how long it takes you, then sure, build it all yourself. You will know all the code and squashing all the bugs will be faster for you. Trying to integrate other people's stuff can be a huge headache, and you should do what works for you and avoid inviting extra stress into your project. Just don't let anyone tell you that real devs do everything from scratch and your game is going to be bad if you use assets. Just do what you need to do to finish your game, and don't blindly believe some asset is going to magically fix everything for you. It might, but you need to be prepared to customize it. Well, that was a lot longer rant than I thought it would be. Where were we? Oh right, the bad stuff about the Open World RPG Toolkit. Like other toolkits, it needs to be created as its own project, but I couldn't find any reason for that. As far as I can tell, there aren't any project-specific settings. Actually, it looks like a lot of choices were made so that it would not be dependent on any project settings, which I actually prefer. But it ends up being a weird set of choices, as it creates a lower quality project overall, which is kind of a theme with this asset. Unfortunately, the project generated isn't a C++ project either, so you'll have to add an empty class and then generate the files yourself, which is just annoying. I believe it's generally good advice to have all of your projects be C++ based, even if you're just going to use blueprints. There's no downside to creating the project as C++ and just getting used to that workflow. Overall, the asset is much less intrusive than some other toolkits, and you can pull it into your project without dominating the whole thing. This helps especially when you want to use a specific part of the asset and ignore the rest. So now that I've told you all the bad things and you're thinking, I'll never use this asset, it sounds awful, let me tell you the most important thing about this asset. It's actually very easy to modify, and the subsystems are well partitioned, and unnecessary features can easily be ignored. This is a really important point. All of the other stuff I complained about are things that you learn how to deal with over time. Would it be better if those issues were fixed? Absolutely. Is the asset unusable? Definitely not. Let's say if I want a good minimap in another game I'm working on, I know I can pull this asset out of my toolbox and get the minimap working in a different project quickly. Okay, it's not quite that easy because the author made it so you have to create a project to use this asset, but now you can see why I prefer assets that can be added to projects instead of being their own projects. But still, I can envision myself coming back to this asset and pulling just the things I need from it. Of course, I got it for free. There's probably a better asset you can buy if you're watching from the future. Okay, enough talk. Let's jump into the game. So we start with the tutorial. I actually added this dialogue system myself. There's nothing in the asset for that. One thing I do want to point out here is that I did add some fixes based on feedback from other Game Jam developers. So I made this hint here stand out a lot more. I don't think anyone figured out the intended ending. I guess people just really want to do what their corporate overlord tells them to do. Basically, the premise is you're working for this awful, evil, totally fictional company named Anazom. They've developed this new AI they want you to compete against, but since the Game Jam theme was collaborate with AI, you're really only going to get bad endings if you play Anazom's game. To get the good ending, you need to I'll let you figure that out on your own. Go ahead and download the game from the link in the description. I'll just show you what happens if you lose, I guess. Now, I'll be the first to admit that this isn't the most engaging gameplay, and I didn't have enough time to implement an addressing scheme that would actually make it challenging to find where the packages are. But I did get compliments on how nice the controls felt, so I'm glad I spent more time getting it to feel good for the jam, instead of just adding complexity. If you're making a game for a jam, you probably want to keep it simple, and you should probably make it half as difficult as you think it is during testing. Which I kind of failed at in both of those departments, as there were a lot of complaints about the timer being too short. I learned you can't really expect people to read between the lines or realize they aren't supposed to just win when they're only going to play your game for 5 minutes or less. Another thing is that I had adjusted the difficulty down, but as I got more familiar with the game, I fell into the pattern of playing it like this, where I return to the main warehouse area without starting the next quest myself. This makes it a lot easier, but again, people aren't going to take the time to build strategies in a game jam. Also, feel free to join me and show off what you can do each month with the free asset packs. If I can do it, anyone can. As always, if you have any suggestions or just want to tell me how awful I am, feel free to leave a comment, I guess. Alright, time to finally get back to my real project. Oh,